viewers already waiting, so here we go. Hello, welcome to the Jorgensen Digital Stage for the fourth event tonight for the Amplifying Black Voices in Hollywood, our inaugural event for diverse perspectives in digital media and design speaker series. To paraphrase James Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this is certainly true of the inequities that have historically shaped the entertainment industry, both on screen and behind the scenes. We are halfway through Black History Month, and today's summit appropriately features conversations with Black leaders from various sectors of the film industry, and will examine its changing landscape by exploring efforts to increase diversity in all aspects of Hollywood, from screenwriting to development and production, producing and directing, and visual effects and post-production. The summit is brought to you by UConn's Department of Digital Media and Design in partnership with Jorgensen Center for the Performing Arts and the H. Fred Simmons African American Cultural Center. We'd like to begin today's event by acknowledging the land that we typically gather on here in Storrs, Connecticut, is the territory of the Mohegan, Manchukuo Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scottish, Golden Hill Pagosset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Tonight's event will feature an hour of conversation, including questions from the virtual audience. Please take advantage of the YouTube chat box to submit questions for our guests, which we will try to answer during the discussion. I'm Heather Elliott Familaro, and I'm a digital artist and documentary filmmaker, and most importantly, the department head for the Digital Media and Design Department at the University of Connecticut. DMD is a young department. We were founded just in 2013, but we've rapidly grown to over 350 undergraduate and graduate students and 25 full-time faculty. We have 7 undergraduate concentrations across the full digital media spectrum: film production, animation, interactivity, business, and the humanities at both the Storrs and Stanford campuses. In our department, we value and celebrate our students' diverse backgrounds, and we support their development both as individuals and as professional media creators. This Diverse Perspectives in Digital Media and Design series is one of the celebrations of these shared values. So now on to the show. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome today's special guests. We've got Alana Mayo, and we're going to talk about challenging the status quo, authentic storytelling at the studio level. Sorry, one second. Alana currently serves as the president of Orion Pictures, a branch of MGM Studios dedicated to creating content that uplifts underrepresented voices and authentic storytelling, both in front of and behind the camera. As Orion's president, Alana Mayo oversees the label's day-to-day operations, including development, acquisitions, physical, and post-production. Prior to that, she served as the head of production and development for Outlier Society, where she oversaw the company's slate of films and television series, and vice president of production of Paramount Pictures, where she worked on films such as A Quiet Place, Annihilation, and Fences. While at Outlier Society, Mayo led the charge with Michael B. Jordan to create opportunities for more equitable hiring in Hollywood with the launch of its first of a kind company-wide inclusion policy in partnership with Warner Media, with Just Mercy, which is based on the memoir of attorney, social justice activist, and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson, who I'll actually add was awarded UConn's Thomas J. Dodd Prize in International Justice and Human Rights in 2019, becoming the first film made under this new initiative. She was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and graduated from Columbia University with a bachelor's degree in English and a bachelor's degree in film studies. After interning with independent New York filmmakers such as Lee Daniels, Tribeca Films, and Warrington Hudlin, she moved to Los Angeles to further her career in feature film production and development. Welcome, Alana.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was such a thorough biography. I'm impressed you had all that.
Thank you. And today's discussion will be co-moderated by two members of our DMD family, visiting assistant professor Nikki Steer-Justice and staff yet student co-host Pauline Batista. Nikki Steer-Justice is an independent producer and seasoned entertainment executive with a background in film production and distribution. She's produced multiple projects, including the Latino thriller Coyote Lake, starring Camila Mendez and Adriana Barraza, as well as the horror anthology Nightmare Cinema from acclaimed directors Joe Dante, David Slade, Mick Garris, Ryuhi Kitamura, and Alana Mayo. In 2017, she helped launch the distribution arm of Good Deed Entertainment by bringing in the Oscar-nominated Van Gogh biopic, Loving Vincent. She went on to become the chief operating officer for the company before leaving to join our department in DMD, where she teaches students in film video production and digital media business strategies. She continues to distribute films as the head of distribution for Buffalo 8, and her focus is on projects from diverse voices that are designed to transform viewer opinions, influence change, and reach underserved audiences. And tonight's staff yet student co-host is Pauline Batista. Pauline is currently a PhD student at UConn's MEAG School of Education, where she finished her coursework and is currently preparing for her comparative exams. She uses film in her research work across Afro-Latinx communities located in UNESCO Latin American heritage sites. She believes participatory action research combined with participatory storytelling can be powerful in supporting communities and voicing their perspectives. Pauline Batista started a community-based documentary filmmaking career at the International Literature Festival of Paraty in Brazil, FLIP. She started as a youth participant, and upon graduating with her bachelor in communication and film production and performance, she returned every summer as an instructor and coordinator of the media program division of the festival. Pauline Batista was honored as the Rio Summer Olympics torchbearer in 2016 because of her outstanding community work. Some of her storytelling credits include Globo TV's Luzinho con Você, a show that featured Black actor Lázaro Ramos, an International Filmmaker Festival of New York winner and International Emmy nominee. So thanks to you, both of you, Pauline and Nikki, for moderating tonight, and I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Oh my, that was, wow, really, really, like the way she reads it, it's like, oh my goodness, you know what I'm saying? Who is she talking about? I appreciate the intro, Heather. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Nikki. I think that this is one of those spaces in which I feel that our students will really appreciate it. So, you know, my first question to you, Alana, it's, I come from a predominantly Black country, Brazil. I was born and raised in Brazil. 56% of our population is Black. But Brazilians really enjoy telling white stories, and we know why. And I'm thinking that doing the work, right? Social justice work is really difficult. Like, let alone doing the work on screen for a predominantly white audience, right? Because the US is a predominantly white country in numbers. So why is it that you get into film, Alana? And what really brought you to the industry?
Oh, there's so much to unpack there, but I'll start from the last question because it's personal. I think one of the things that's special, I was on a call earlier and somebody said this, one of the things that's special about film and why I think a lot of people are motivated to come into this industry, it's for sure true of me, is particularly if you do feel othered or ostracized or marginalized, someone described it as, a hand reaching out from the void. And, whether you're seeing yourself in your own specific identity represented or the screen or not, the power of storytelling was always so present in my life, more so actually from books than from film, even growing up. But I just always felt like I connected to an understanding of myself and an understanding of the world through storytelling. And I was very lucky that my mom is such a avid reader, and she didn't start me off on, I feel like I went from Lyle the Crocodile to Toni Morrison. So she started me very early in reading all of these incredible Black authors who, who that was how I understood the world. And, I had a very secure and comfortable upbringing, but I was going through all of the same things that anybody experiences, regardless of the circumstance, of just trying to understand the world and my place in it. And unlike, I'm so excited to be talking to a group of students who I presume are all younger than me, because I'm so inspired by how much more access younger people have to conversations and language and information about their identity. I didn't have that, growing up. And I think the status quo at the time growing up was really not particularly inclusive at all. And so I don't think that I knew, I wanted to, but I don't think I knew how to create space for in the social status quo for me, and I did that. I worked through all of that in storytelling. And so I also grew up in a household that watched a lot of visual media, watched a lot of movies, watched a lot of television. So by the time I was going to college, I just really both loved storytelling so much. And I had the privilege of thinking that I could have a career doing that. But I think I always understood that the power and the impact of storytelling could be so much greater than just the art that's created. We tease a lot that the MGM logo is art for art's sake, but I think that what I always was interested in was art above and beyond art's sake. I was very conflicted in school as an English major and a film major. I was very conflicted of whether the right thing to do was to go teach and contribute to the world in that way, or to be in film. And I had a friend who, said to me, I feel like you could probably do all of the things that you think you do with teaching through storytelling. And it completely cracked open the way that I thought about things. So anyway, the short answer is that it was always really just driven by a personal desire to work in this medium. But what's become more acute for me the more time I've done it is how actually purposeful that work can be outside of just making beautiful films.
I know they sure are. And here's the thing though. I hear you talk, so give us a little more context. Where did you grow up? What was that like? Because I feel like, for example, I did not grow up with a household full of books, right? So for me, Black stories were something that seeing a Black person on television was something entirely, new. They had to be American to be on my TV.
Yeah.
To be Whitney. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Tyson. Those were the folks who we saw growing up, right? So give us a little more context. How was it? Where did you grow up? For folks who are watching now, and how was it really, in detail?
Well, I was actually born in New York, but I was raised in Chicago, and I grew up in an entertainment industry family. So my family all worked in music, and specifically Black music. My dad was a radio executive. My mom worked with specifically Black entertainment and sports lawyers. And so I still do have as much of a love of music as I do, if not maybe a little bit more, as I do for film. But I saw the collision of Black art in music and with people that were also politically engaged and had something to say in the world, right? And so I think I always understood that, in the back of my head. But I was very lucky to grow up in a kind of I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, but my mom's one of 13 and a good chunk of our family lives there all over the city. So I kind of grew up
city girls.
I grew up with a somewhat expansive, understanding of, the world. But the God's honest truth, Pauline, is I came to this concept and understanding of what it means to see yourself in the work way later, honestly, in college. I think what was so profound to me was when I came to that understanding to realize how comfortable I had been with the status quo, right? And my parents are incredibly conscious people. We talked about identity. We talked about what it is to be Black in America. But I think that, I always tell this anecdote that my cousin, who's older than me, when I would go visit her at her house, she wouldn't let us watch anything on TV unless there was a Black actor in it. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to watch?
Yeah,
First of all,
literally watch nothing.
Nothing. I was like, okay, there's that little bit of programming over there. But more than that, I was like, I love Dawson's Creek. And I would like to be able to watch Dawson's Creek if I'm here on a Thursday or whatever that show came on. And so I didn't at the time really understand how crazy that was to not see myself and my experience that represented on television and in film, right? And I also was like, you know, I grew up post Spike Lee, who was a major, like I was a fan of Spike Lee. My AOL Instant Messenger name and most of my logins are still Spiky5284, which is Spike. I couldn't get Spike for some reason. And my birthday, you know, like I was like, I saw Bamboozled while I was in high school, you know, and so I had a lot of like, I'm the beneficiary of a lot of work that had been done before me, but I didn't really understand just how much further it needed to go, probably until I was in college. And even in college, I had the great benefit of working for Lee Daniels, and he had these two incredible Black executives who were running his company, and just seeing their commitment to the kind of storytelling that, you know, that they did, seeing that Lee was, you know, putting so much of his own personal energy and effort into producing and directing, and not just after having a career as a talent manager, and not just sitting on those laurels, and getting a type of filmmaker story out into the world, and putting Mos Def in movies, and, you know, putting Cuba Gooding Jr. and Helen Mirren together as a couple, you know, in a movie, and then ultimately, and like casting Monique, and then ultimately, you know, doing Precious, which was in development when I was working for him. I just had all of these kind of guiding lights that, as my consciousness was raising, were showing me how important what you're describing is, you know, how important it was to change the level of representation on television and in film.
Folks have really understood this need of like, okay, it's really great. It's greater than me as a professional, right? It's greater than me as an individual. Those stories need to be told.
Yes.
You know? And that's huge. I appreciate that you share that. But, you know, I'm sitting here and thinking that there are barriers, right? You walk into some, I mean, film school is pretty new, right? It's like what, from the 80s or something like that, you know, let alone, you know, film school for Black folks. I mean, yeah, Spike Lee is every Black girl in film's crush to this day. We love him, right? There's just something about him. So, I mean, like I said before, there are barriers. So what is it that you think that kept you motivated? Because, I mean, I'm thinking about you, right? You know, Alana, the young girl developing into, you know, a young Black professional. And I'm sure there were hella barriers, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone is Lee Daniels and not everyone's Spike Lee, you know? So what kept you motivated through those barriers is my question to you.
There's also a personal answer to this too, because I mean, if I had a nickel for every time that I was like, I'm quitting this industry, it's too corrupt, you know, there's no space for me, there's no space for the things I care about, I'd have several nickels. And so really, you know, part of it is just, you know, and I think this is frankly like a necessary trait to some extent for anyone that works in the entertainment industry. Some of it is just being an obstinate, stubborn, tenacious, unrelenting person. Like I actually really enjoy being told no, because it's fuel for me to, you know, I'm a contrarian by nature. So I love to disagree with somebody, right? But the honest to God's truth is, you know, and this is why I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, you can hear any number of recommendations for what to do to change what the status quo has been. The same things pop up all the time. But when people talk about representation behind the camera, that is so massively important and cannot be overstated, in my opinion, because both on a personal level, what kept me going were the people in my lives that just pulled me along, you know, in my professional life, the mentors that I had, the sponsors that I had, the people who I could look to and say, you know, I had a colleague who I worked for who I was trying to decide whether I wanted to stay a studio executive or leave when I was at Paramount. And he said, well, whose job would you want to have? And I said, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know, Mary Parent or Scott Rudin. And he's like, yeah, you and everybody else. He's like, whose job would you like to have that's a job you could have in the next like 3 to 5 years? And I started to think about it. And it was hard to answer the question because there were very few people. But then I started to think about peers of mine that I admired, or, you know, this, you know, like the Doreen Olivers and Lisa Cortezes of the world that I'd seen in Lee's office. And I was like, okay, there's a model for a version of what you want to do, and seeing that and knowing that that's possible, and then ultimately developing relationships with them. Like, there's this incredible, I'm really proud to be a part of this. I think there's this incredible community of Black executives in Hollywood, and the most senior of us is still a peer of mine, like there's not, there's like Dick Parsons and then like not a lot of Black executives who worked at movie studios. And we would get together and have dinner and talk about our experiences. I would say the same for, I have this incredible group of women who, there was a time where at every major studio, there was like one or two young women that were in junior executive roles. This was after my Fox. It was like right at the end of my Fox experience, Nikki. But we would get together for dinner once every 2 or 3 months, just to commiserate about our experience and to unload and to share. And people don't talk about that kind of camaraderie in this industry, but I'm so fortunate to be a part of it, because it's just pulled me along. And now we all sit in these communities and we reflect on, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of us are now sitting in positions where we can help and do that for other people, right? So that's huge. So I would say that. And then honestly, you have to be excited about change. Like you have to be excited about knowing that you're a part of moving a ball down a field. I don't know why I'm making a sports analogy. I don't know anything about sports, but you have to be excited about being a part of the progress, because then you're like, it's incremental, right? Like, it's not going to be, this industry by the time I retire from it may not be 180 degrees different from what it was when I started. If it's 20, 15, 30, whatever it is, that's massive. And how exciting to be a part of that. What the job that I have now, if you had asked me, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, if it would exist, I would have said absolutely not.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, so.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's like, even as you go through college, right, I feel like you're making films and whatnot, and there's several mentorship opportunities with folks, who do, who are doing storytelling and whatnot, but like I was never really interested in like being mentored by a white storyteller.
Yeah.
And nobody really people don't have these conversations. Well, yeah. 2 conversations that I feel like people do not have as you go through it.
Yeah.
How is it that you make an amazing film? How is it that you tell an amazing story? I feel like people tell you how to use the software and whatnot, but I feel like nobody's really having this, my experience. Now it could be different, you know what I'm saying? But I feel like people are not having these critical conversations, right? And they need to be having those critical conversations, because the ways in which we're teaching people how to make films now, well, I mean, if we don't change that, it's not going to be sustainable, particularly for Black and brown kids going through college.
Amen.
In an era, where, social discourse is created right here.
Absolutely.
If we don't change that, if we don't start having these conversations, it's not going to be sustainable. So I appreciate your truth. So, I could really ask you questions all day long. And I feel like this conversation that we're having right now is sort of like this reparation through storytelling, we're sharing our stories and our truths. And I appreciate that space. And when I say reparations, for folks who are watching and are not familiar with that language, reparations is, folks were historically separated during, enslavement. And once, we get those Black voices together, we call it reparations, right? Because we're now, it's a very deep conversation, but to make it really short, one thing that I have to share with you, when it comes to that kind of conversation, an example is, I come from a background in which, Brazilian television, predominantly Black country. I was working this really big project with this really big, Black Brazilian actor personality, and his show took, 3 years to even be considered by the network and get funded. And it was a really big show, this, that, and the third. And, I feel like the answer is always, the audience is not used to it. So there's only so much we can invest in Black stories. Like, we have to be really careful when it comes to Black stories and funding. And it's extremely problematic. So we have a student who asked the following question, and his name is Joseph Chiro. So his question is, what are some of the reasons people in underrepresented groups are exempt from the forefront of most media?
Oh, such a good question, Joseph.
Right? It's a course. You can teach a whole course with several lectures. Take it over. Yeah.
I'll try to do it succinctly. I think there's kind of two buckets of reasons, right? One fall into systemic exclusion, which is racism and sexism and misogyny and homophobia, et cetera. And this industry is not exempt from following the social and historical norms of the rest of the world. So all of those things apply to Hollywood, right? The other piece of it, and the piece of it that I'm more interested in, because, that piece is something that is a much bigger problem that we are all trying to solve. And there are people way smarter than I that can acknowledge why those systems of oppression are in place and what we need to do to dismantle them. And depending on the day, I am somewhere between cynical and resolute about America's ability to do that. And so, that's a separate bucket, but those rules also apply to Hollywood. The part of it that I'm obsessed with, and that is the foundation of what I'm trying to build with Orion, is that the business model and the business case that exists, and it's exactly what this, studio was telling you, Pauline, that exists for mass-produced filmed entertainment, is based on a series of terms that end up being exclusionary for a lot of people, right? So, for example, you can talk about the international film market, right? There has been a perceived foregone conclusion that in certain key markets that exist around the world, but we'll just focus on Europe, that movies that have, for example, a Black lead in them, or that are, culturally specific to Black culture, are less valuable, literally meaning that they will not perform as well at the box office, right? That has been a I would argue that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What's that?
No, it says it's kind of like a motive. That's what folks say first.
Yeah, exactly. No, usually a lot of conversations will end there, right? But the bigger issue is not even necessarily that's the belief system, because that's the thing that, whether you look at what Netflix has been able to do globally and how certain titles perform across global markets for them, or you actually really get underneath that data and look at the exceptions to those rules, that's fairly easily dispelled. And I think most people would even just anecdotally suspect that that's not true. But the bigger issue is that baked into a green light decision around a movie, for most movies, specifically movies that have to, gross significant amount of box office at the, a significant amount of box office around the world, which, just so you know, the international box office is far more robust because it's still novel and new than the domestic box office. If your business model is built around needing for an international number projection to be high, then it ends up becoming impossible to make a business case for a movie where you're projecting that you're not going to make any money or very little money overseas. It's just hard to make that business case. So then somebody has to say, all right, we don't care, we don't care what the projections are going to suspect, because either we're trying to break this thing that's been unfair and not true for a really long time, or we're going to figure out other ways to unlock financial value from these movies, or we're going to make movies at a price point where they can be really driven by profit. But you know what? If they break even because we can't figure the foreign piece out of it, so be it. Because the truth is, there are exhibitors around the world who do, that is a real thing. There are exhibitors around the world who don't necessarily value that content as much as they should. So you have to say, we're changing the way that we're talking about the value of, and we're unlocking value that nobody has perceived to be there before of these kinds of movies, meaning movies with literally any of the people that I'm interested in making movies with, by, and for. Identity wise, people of color, specifically Black people, because that's what we're really talking about today, but queer, women, there's entire genres of storytelling that, if you have a woman in the lead, are looked at as not being able to perform as well globally, right? So there's the storytelling and the myth of what works and what doesn't work that we're trying to unravel and break, and that's happening and gonna happen organically. But really what I think is so important for people to understand understand is there's a lot of subjectivity to why you want to make something or not, right? And the hardest thing for young artists to understand is that you will have a person like me sitting on the other side of a laptop who may or may not know you, who may or may not have actually like great taste, who may or may not, you know, deserve to be sitting in that position, who starts off by getting to instinctually just say, this is something I want to do or not do, right? And them's the breaks, as they would say. Like, that's just the world that we live in and how it works to be an artist and try to connect art to commerce. But it's not okay and not fair that there is a false business case that is exclusionary to an entire group of people and type of story that is a false business case that is, in fact, my argument has always been, because, you know, everyone in this industry is a capitalist. They all understand this. My argument has always been like, I'm telling you, there is money that you are leaving on the table by not. And I can give you any number of historical examples. I can show data, like I can tell you my own opinion and belief and my own experience, but it is ridiculous and unnecessary to have a business case that excludes a certain kind of story. And that's the thing that I think that we're actually really making some headway with across tons of industries, right? Like, we've seen it with, you know, I always look to corporate responsibility, and we've seen the brands that have gotten canceled by young people. God bless the young people, because the young people are like, you're not on the right side of an issue. And so who's going to tweet about it? That's going to catch fire. And guess what? Nobody buys your product anymore. You know, this is a world that wasn't possible 5-10 years ago. And so I think we're going to move in the right direction with that. If you know, Orion can, as a startup, really successfully prove that out, I will have felt very good about what we did.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's so crazy to me because you mentioned a lot of things I'm really obsessed with. Like, the first thing is those predictions, right? Yeah. We understand that research methods were not created by Black, brown, and queer folks. Right. I'm just gonna let it marinate. So, you know, so when you look at predictions, I mean, how are you measuring that? You know what I'm saying?
I remember at Fox, we did some studies on, and we were given marketing insights and demographic information on who was actually going to the box office and driving box office growth. And it was predominantly women. And despite that disparity, men were the ones that they were continuing to target and market to. And it was incredibly frustrating. And I feel like this has been a long time coming, where the moral arguments for diversity on screen and the commercial viability of those titles are aligned. But exactly what Alana's saying, it's incredibly frustrating because you have these major studios who aren't willing to back it in that way. And that was actually going to be one of my questions for you, Alana, because I mean, one of the things that I always admired about you as an executive was you have this clarity of vision, and the other executives would always speak to that as well, even as a junior executive at Fox. And you've been able to use your position in the industry to really be a spokesperson and to really amplify the voices for diverse communities, whether it's people of color, the LGBTQ community, or women. But you've been able to rise up the ranks and continue doing that in various positions of power. So how do you find that balance when you have studios that are run by predominantly white men who are telling you, no, this is what's going to make us money, and you're trying to push through the visions of these diverse filmmakers?
It's also a good question. It's truly, I'm surprised that I keep getting hired, but I think I don't know, to be honest with you, but I think the thing that clicked for me, and this is after I left Fox, which was my first corporate experience in life, right? My dad was an executive who owned a big company and worked for big companies, but never really carried himself that way. So I was really kind of culture shocked at Fox by the way that decisions were made. And again, I just have to give really so much credit to the people that would just give me information that I otherwise wouldn't have. So I remember Drew Crivello, who was, I think, an SVP at the time, and he was trying to make a remake of The Fly, but with a woman at the center of it. And I can't remember who was going to direct, but I feel like Jane Goldman was writing. And I was like, this is an amazing project. I was like, we should make this. And he was like, let me explain to you why this isn't going to get made. And he taught me how to look through a P&L, a profit and loss statement, which every business has, but is really the defining document by which most green light decisions are made, right? Which is just looking at the revenue versus the cost and seeing how much money is to be lost or made. And the P&L made it look like the movie was going to lose money. You know, I hope this is okay to share. I'm sure it's fine. 10 years ago. I don't think Drew will care. But, you know, I was like, oh, if this is how you're making the decision, you know, on paper, it looks like a no, right? And it sparked my curiosity for the real reason I went into the studio world was I wanted to understand why certain things got the money and resources to a certain extent and others didn't. And once I started to understand that, it was like my grad school. So I was just working on movies to learn. And then once I started to understand that, I recognized that there is this pocket of filmmaking. And it's not, I don't really think of it even as like indie film, right? Because indie film, the connotation there is that it's just passion and you're just taking a leap of faith with somebody and nobody's going to make any money, et cetera, which I have a huge respect for and value and interest in those movies. But I wasn't thinking so much indie films as much as I was like, there is a pocket of films in that could be made inside of a studio system or some sort of corporate system that if you pick the right genre, you pick the right talent, and it's familiar enough to the people that have to say yes and have to sell to be recognizable as something that could have upside, but with a really great filmmaker inside of it who you as the creative executive are saying, I'm going to back you and I'm going to back your vision because the dirty secret between us is we know what we're trying to do is make a good movie. But I'm going to present this to the greenlighters as a great piece of business. So everything made under $30 million, really under 20, some sort of internationally meaningful talent inside of it. And then, you know, in a genre that people, or something that could get nominated for awards. And inside of that, I was able to like get stuff greenlit because the P&L always looked good because there was an actor or an actress in it who was, you know, who had great comps for opening movies globally. It was a sci-fi, a prestige drama, or a horror film. But the three films that I'm referring to all had filmmakers inside of it that I was like, I know you're making art. You and I we're on the same page about that. And how I'm going to interact with you as a creative executive is to be able to do that. But like, here's the kind of movie I think that can align those two parts of myself, right? The part of myself that wants to crack the business and the part of myself that really more than anything is creatively driven. And then within that, it was working with filmmakers. Like I worked with Alex Garland on this film, and we very early on, we're talking casting, and in the movie, all of the characters die over the course of this like journey, right? And he said to me, Alana, I promise you, it's an ensemble cast of 5 actresses. I promise you that all these actresses aren't going to be white. And I promise you that the first person to die won't be Black. And I was like, oh, you and I, sir, we are aligned. And so I tried to work with people that fit that paradigm of like, I could get these movies made and get attention to them and get marketing backing behind it, but who were also trying to do like a cool and equitable thing. And I've just always kind of lived in that tension. And the more I've gone along, the more I've been given opportunities or created opportunities, you know, where I could be bolder about just saying like, this is what we're doing. Like, I'm not even going to try to hide the ball behind this other pitch. This is what we're doing. This is the priority. But it really came from trying to understand that like, I got to be able to make the business case. And the business case can be, it's not going to make a lot of money. But you know what? There's other reasons. There's tons of corporate benefits that come from movies that aren't just driving, you know, $100+ million at the box office.
Right, especially now. We're just talking about, you know, cancel culture. Like, you know, just think about, you know, yeah. But I feel like it takes someone like you with that kind of passion. You know what I'm saying? To kind of like, okay, no, listen, there's other benefits too, you know?
Yeah.
I think this is a great point. Okay, so First of all, this is really the insight I tuned in for. Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much. Thank you. So let's talk about, the data that supports what we were just talking about real quick. Some of our students read that Annenberg Inclusion Initiative report, right? That really was something, something scary yet hopeful, right? Because you see that some change has been happening since 2017, and it's only been 3 years when it comes to like character representation. It's really not a lot. We see that there's a lot to do, right? And we need to better support our queer, Black and brown students, period. And that's that. You know what I'm saying? I know personally, like students who tuned in to this section to get this information. So we need to be having these conversations. I repeat that. We do need more, Black storytellers in the classrooms, more queer storytellers in the classrooms, and we know that. So let's really talk about it. So another student, her name is Christina McDonald. She asked, so what do you think are the best steps forward for continuing and possibly ramping up the progress shown in the report? What do you feel is the genre or subset of film that needs more work right now?
Well, first of all, shout out to Dr. Stacey Smith and the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. We love her. If I can answer the question to what genres we need more help with. I mean, I think the big areas where we need to fix are directors, more women directing, more LGBTQ plus identifying directors, and I would say more intersections amongst race, gender, and sexuality, because what I have found is in film specifically, and this is unique to film and not TV, though I guess you would just change it from director to showrunner, is that when people of those identities are in the director seat, there is actually, I don't believe in trickle-down effects, but there is a trickle-down effect of hiring and empowerment and tone set. Not always, because the person has to care, but that happens more organically than when those people are not sitting in the positions of leaderships on shows. So I would say that's an easy way, frankly, to me, to change things. I think the same thing holds true for greenlighting. I'm one of the things that I'm so proud of. I cannot take credit for this idea. It was Michael DeLuca, but the greenlight committee at Orion is all women, and women identifying, but all women. They're myself and another Black woman, 2 women of color on the greenlight committee, and I feel the difference. And also, like, everyone's incredibly capable and brilliant, and I'm just like, it's some of the smartest people at the company, so I'm just grateful to have them on the greenlight. But like, I feel the difference in the approach of, there's coming at it from a place of yes, more so than I have felt when working with greenlight committees that are that have more men on them. And this is just an opinion from Alana. I don't have any data to back this up. The hiring stuff is real.
You want the data today?
Okay, well, according to, I'll cite myself. The experience that I have had is it's markedly different. There's a lot less attention to ego and more attention to how are we doing this innovative and cool thing. So I think that's a huge deal. But I think what we've seen is an incredible amount of progress in the past. You can also credit April Rain for Oscar So White. In the past 5 years of Hollywood needing to and trying to do better, and also a resistance in the actual numbers of achieving results that are markedly different than it was in the past, right? So to me, the hiring piece of it is huge. But I think really the thing that we're missing, and we're not unique in this, like you could look at this across all sorts of industries, is that we're missing, in my opinion, policy and accountability measures. This is a referral industry anyway. And so, the more people you put in positions who will refer people into positions of power differently, like that'll have a domino effect, but that's going to happen too slowly. And that's also counting on everyone of different identities who get put in positions of power furthering this agenda, right? And I'll speak from my own personal experience. This is incredibly important to me. Like, this is the most important thing to me. And I also spent a great amount of my day on stuff that has nothing to do with diversity and inclusion efforts, because I also am doing the job, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that can't be enough. There has to be at a policy level. The inclusion rider and inclusion policy was a first step that I think, we all now, a few years on the other side of it, recognize needs to evolve and probably does need more accountability measures. But to me, that's really what gets us to a place where, where you can actually start to see an impact in the results.
Yeah, thank you. So I like to mix it up. So we actually have a question from our YouTube watchers.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan Quilly says, "Hi, Alana."
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. So whoever you want, love to you, Ryan. We love everyone. So I'm thrilled to see you today, and I am so proud of you. A question for you, because I think it's a great segue to what you were just saying. Can you tell us how you decide to invest in improving talent at the studio level?
And Unproven?
Yeah, Unproven.
Yeah. That's a great question. I personally am more interested in new and exciting than I am in not. It's never been my thing really to work with like the most established, filmmaker. I read Dana Walden, I think, was speaking somewhere, and she said, the trick is to learn that when you have that feeling of fear, to lean into that, because that means you might be onto something. And I feel like I was very lucky to have things work out well, where I had invested in somebody who had made one film or no films, or whose, films hadn't made money before, and to see that pay dividends both in the art that was created, but also the commercial the commercial outcome too. So, for me, I have a theory that if you pick, if you go with, frankly, an instinct that just happens when you make a lot of movies, like the alchemy of idea to execution is so crazy. Like, no one had seen this is like the best example. No one had seen Black Panther other than, I think, the filmmakers, or Ryan specifically, and probably the studio, until the premiere. And so everyone was at the premiere like, what is this gonna be? We don't know. And then it was just like, oh my God, this movie is so good. But I say all of that to say that movie with, Ryan having made 2 incredible features before, and like that cast and Disney and Marvel, there was still the question of would that alchemy turn out to be what that movie ended up being. And I think ultimately exceeded every expectation, right? So you have to know and lean into the fact that, like, you can think something's going to come out great and it could be not, and vice versa. So there's a little bit of like gut into it. And then what I try to do, again, because I'm like, I recognize that at some point people will stop hiring me if I just am losing buckets of money, is what I try to do is, when you're really taking a leap of faith, right? When you're saying like, this person never made a movie before, or we're giving them way more money to do this than their last film, is you try to mitigate the risk as much as you can. Because at a certain point, most people don't get failure is built into doing this job, whatever you do. And most people's careers don't end because they have a failure, whatever that looks like, or however you define it. But if you're like willfully making reckless decisions and losing people money, then yeah.
Right. You would be doing your very mission a disservice, right?
That's exactly right.
Really, I mean, the key word here when it comes to, Black, brown, queer, anything across those really big, institutions is like, be strategic.
Mm-hmm.
Strategic. Oh my gosh, look for mentorship if you don't know, you know what I'm saying? So I really appreciated that you shared that. So our next question is from Christina McDonald, and she asks, so do you think, I'm going to read it really slow because it's one of those really complex questions. I feel like, students love asking those questions and we love them. So do you think equity can be fully achieved in existing companies? Like, and just talking about really big companies, like Universal and Disney, or do new companies with a better foundational understanding of equity need to be created? So is there hope?
Great question. It's a great question. I would say decidedly the latter. I think that what existing bigger, we'll call them legacy companies, have is resources, infrastructure, like they're just things that you need to have a business model be executed to a certain level that is institutionalized inside of a very small amount of companies, right? Run by a very small group of people. And it takes disruption for those people at like a pretty high level for those people to want to, even within those machines, do anything differently. So I give a ton of credit to Netflix because the disruption of SVOD, the disruption of people wanting to watch things at home, the disruption of, challenging this very small group of companies that had owned the market share without really being challenged. The lack of competition to a certain extent wouldn't force anybody's hand to do anything differently. And all of a sudden, there's this big competitor who's way ahead of you all in a new technology that is incredibly valuable. And all of a sudden you've got to switch it up, And so I think that you can disrupt some of those bigger legacy companies, but I think that, it's honestly like almost not even worth, the effort to do it, as opposed to investing in new companies that can be built on a foundation of equity and equality, as you're asking. But I think both of the things are valuable. If you get a huge corporation that has an infrastructure and has an ability that a smaller company or a newer company does not have, cannot have, will not have for years, if you get them to change by a matter of degrees, that's massively important.
Oh, absolutely.
Hugely important. So I think both of the things should happen and can happen at the same time. And the reality is, like, if you believe in a free market, you create competition for something, last man standing should be the person who figures it out the best. And I happen to think, I think you said this, Pauline, earlier perfectly, that the kind of altruistic moral case for doing this is aligned with the business case in a way that it hasn't been before, or it has been but has not been acknowledged. And so I think now most companies understand the value of building, not only because it's the right thing to do, but of building your company around a different set of values than have been prioritized before.
Right. And I think that, there is a lot of value in tuning into, Disney Plus and kind of seeing, Black is King and kind of seeing those projects that, were unheard of before. You know what I'm saying? So there's value. And I think there's a lot of people power in that.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that. So we talked about the work itself, right? And we've been talking about this really broad, big concepts and stories we need to tell and ways in which we need to approach the work. Joseph is asking, so who are some directors, writers, you've dropped some names, but who are some directors, writers, and cinematographers from underrepresented groups that you would recommend looking into for their engaging in creative work?
I mean, so just so you know, my assistant flagged this question for me. She was like, I feel like you could talk about the rest of this stuff, but you might want to do some thought on this before you get on the Zoom. I didn't take her advice, so I'm going to do this off the cuff. But the first person that jumps to mind is, if you all don't know, Nina Yang Bon Jovi. She is incredible. And she is one at the center of this work and has been committed to it for years. She and Forrest Whitaker are partnered on a production company together, production financing company. And she has, raised an incredible amount of money and has this incredible amount of investors that she dedicates that capital to empowering and financing the first, second film of Black directors. And she financed Fruitvale Station. She financed Sorry to Bother You. She financed an incredible film that just premiered at Sundance, Passing by Rebecca Hall, that are all movies that I genuinely believe would not have been made were it not for Nina and Forrest's company. But Nina herself, as a Chinese American woman, is so quietly and impressively dedicated to this work. I just have to shout her out. I live in awe of her. I honestly would almost rather email you guys a list of my greatest hits of writers and directors and cinematographers, because it's long. But what I will say is that what I'm actually the most excited about, and this is really where I'm leaned into at Orion, is, we've in the States, we've had specifically like this, I hate to call it a renaissance because I think that has the wrong connotation, but we've been having rather consistently like a lot of really prolific Black, I'm going to say content creators, because I mean filmmakers, television creators, et cetera, for the past 5 years. Like, it's been a very exciting time. What I think is equally exciting is the movies that are coming out of Latin America, the movies that are coming out of Nigeria, the movies that are coming out of South Korea. There is this really, the work that's coming out of the UK, there is this really kind of incredible, because we now have access to movies not made in the States because of streaming, there is this incredible, if you're just a movie and television film lover, there's an incredible moment happening right now where they're just great films that are being made outside of the US, and I find them to be, that's what's really getting me excited these days.
Yeah, and I see, it's crazy because I do a lot of diversity oriented work, and people ask me a very similar question. You know what? I'm just like, listen, this very thing of thinking that there's a Bible for something, it's very colonial, white, anti-queer, anti-Black, anti-brown thinking.
Sure.
My response is usually, okay, look at who's telling the story.
Yeah, amen.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's a Black person story, like,
amen.
Why would you be, looking for a white storyteller?
Yes, yeah, amen.
Look at who's telling the story. It's just as easy as that.
Amen.
That's what I tell people. Anyway, our next question, we have another question from one of our watchers. So Sahil Laul, that's, I think, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. They're asking, as a Southern Asian American, I see the competitive nature of other Southern Asians in the industry because of tokenism, and tokenism is another course that we could, teach, right? So tokenism and storytelling. How do we foster abundance mentally rather than scarcity mentally, both on and off camera for BIPOC or Black Indigenous people? I just have to break that down because, so how do we do that?
Oh, it's such a good question. Right? I have a zero tolerance for the alternative. I mean, it's to me one of the most, like, talk about colonialism, and one of the most kind of devastating symptoms of, it's so unnecessary and counterproductive. And I think it happens at I think there's actually a lot of personal agency inside of this. So, I have to be honest, like, I think this generation of people that exist inside of the Hollywood ecosystem are far better than previous generations. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just a generational thing. I don't know if it's because we have more privilege, but I think within your own, forget like what's happening inside of the industry, within your own control and community, fostering, nurturing, and insisting upon collaboration amongst other people that are minorities or marginalized in the industry is a responsibility that we all have. One, because that kind of back channel, this is my friend, so I'm going to give them a piece of information, or I'm going to make a certain kind of deal with them that I wouldn't, or I'm going to back them when nobody else would, is how Hollywood functions. It's just more often than not, it's white straight men doing it for each other, right? So that is actually like a tenet of this industry, of how business gets done. So we have to do that to be able to, to create, to be competitive in of ourselves. But more than that, I mean, I tell this story a lot too. Just forgive me for 1 second. The sun is like right in my face. I'm just gonna.
Got glare drama for you.
I mean, I'm like, I keep trying to move, and I'm like, there's no place is safe. But I tell this story all the time because a lot of times people will ask me, like, kind of to the earlier question of like, what kept you going with all of the obstacles in the way? And I mean, I have a community of Black people, and specifically Black women, that I the number of times I have called them and being like, I'm going to quit my job. And they've talked me off of a ledge, or I don't know how we're going to do this. So-and-so said this crazy thing. This doesn't seem possible. I'm not getting the raise that I should get, whatever. You have to have that community of people that can understand your experience to just survive in an industry where you are part of a marginalized community. Yeah. And then on top of that, what I'm so grateful for, I've never really felt necessarily an imposter syndrome, but what I've always felt is like, you have to be smarter, better, faster. And so for a very long time, the way that would manifest for me is I would try to show that I knew all of the answers. I would try to show that I was inherently, I could do every job. No, I know that I can do that, whatever. And then I started to realize, and I was literally coached into this through mentorship, but I started to realize that all of these people that were sitting in positions of power, that they were, whether they could consciously acknowledge this or not, they were recognizing that they didn't know everything, and thus relying on people around them who were smarter, better, or faster in a thing to help them look smarter, better, and faster. And once I realized that that's how people were operating, I was like, okay, let's switch it up. So now I start to say things like, oh, you know what? Listen, I'm learning this in real time, so I'm really leaning on you to X, Y, and Z, or let's talk offline for 2 hours and you tell me, give me your expertise and what you know. What that's necessary to any sort of professional advancement. It's just a proper lesson that you learn. And when you can do that with people that can speak to and understand the totality of your experience and your point of view, it's like, it just feels good. It just feels good. So I say all that to say, whatever people in the past have done, just be different.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. That's just, that easy. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that. So we have a shout out and then another quick question. Okay. So a student, Joseph, again, he said, overall, I am ecstatic for this presentation on Friday, today. The content for this class has yet to be enabled to expand my knowledge and diversity. I'm ready for a great discussion about equity on a studio level, which is a component of the creation of media I feel goes very underrepresented in terms of discussions of inequality across media. We're just talking about it with different words. Thank you, Joseph. So the question is, Alana, it's a very cliche question. But as an educator, as a Black lady, educator in film education, I have to echo that question myself. So as a woman, okay. So it's two parts really. So what is your advice for queer, Black, and brown young folk interested in having a career in storytelling today? And how, are you ready? And how can white folks be of support?
Yeah. I love that question because there's a lot that could be done. The advice that I would have for this is like, I have a cliche answer for the first one, but it's true. The advice that I have for, a queer, Black, also, woman or woman identifying person to have a career in this is at a certain point, you have to recognize that all of the things that are specific to your identity and experience are assets. And it's hard to recognize that when you're in a room full of people and no one looks like or sounds like or identifies with you. And you can put any set of, identifiers on it. But if you feel othered, which is most people not white, cis, straight, and male in Hollywood, if you feel othered, you've got to at a certain point, start to look at that as I can do things, say things, think things, have a point of view that the majority of people in this industry probably can't because they don't understand it. And that's a massive, in storytelling, it's all about the voice. It's all about the specificity. It's all about, it literally comes from you. It's your intellectual property. And you got to just start to walk in that, I always say, there was a time where I didn't feel like I knew enough. I didn't feel like I was respected. I didn't feel like I was valued. And I was like, this is their shit, not my shit. At a certain point, I was like, I'm not going to hold this. I'm not going to carry this because this isn't your shit. You didn't feel that way when you're around your family. You didn't feel that way when you're around your friends. So like, you're not going to feel that way in here. And then I just walked into rooms like, hi, I'm Alana. This is what I think. This is what I have to offer. And like, do you want to come along for that or not? And if not, cool. I will take these talents elsewhere. You know? So that's my advice. And then I would give this advice, and it speaks to this idea of allyship. But, you know, I think the main and obvious thing is that it is not the responsibility of the like oppressed to have to explain their experience to anyone, you know? So I think that the biggest thing that you can do is like, none of us can fully understand the experience of any other person, you know, not ours, right? And you can, the closer to in proximity you are to somebody or an experience, the better you can understand it. So getting proximate is really important, to quote our friend Brian Stevenson. So if you are like, wow, racism seems really bad, and like, how do we fix this? How do you get proximate to that, you know, that circumstance? Do you want to just listen to the experience? Listen without opining, which is the thing everybody in Hollywood, myself included, needs to get the advice. It's a shitty town of listeners. There's a town of shitty listeners. Like, you're not taught that. Like, you're taught to express and put your point of view out there. There's so much value to just listening to and hearing the experience of others. If you have my job, being able to listen and hear the point of view of the artist that you're collaborating with is massively important. So apply that to learning about and understanding the experience of other people, and you'll draw whatever conclusions you draw from it. But the other thing I will say is that, you know, this less applies to probably students, but when you are a student, or when you become somebody who sits in a position of power, specifically if you are white, and specifically if you are white and male, your ability to sponsor people is greater than it will be for anybody not you. Yep. And I have had so many white men who've just said, here, I'm giving you this, whether it's like, I'm giving you this salary, I'm giving you this job opportunity, I'm giving you this movie to work on. And, you know, I feel very personally conflicted about it, because I'm like, I don't want to necessarily credit my career to that, but I have to know and understand that that is how so many people who become successful along their career get opportunities. And if you can give that to somebody who does not have the privilege to you that you have, you're doing a huge amount to balance the equilibrium. So those are my pieces of advice.
Alana, it's so crazy because we started with reparations and now we're ending with reparations. And that right there was reparations. Alana, it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much. I wish I could give you a hug right now. You are so amazing.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm sure our students really appreciated that. Thank you for having me, Heather. Thank you for having me, Nikki. Thank you, everyone who's watching tonight. I really appreciated this. It's been amazing. Alana Mayo, everyone. Little hand. Thank you. Heather, Nikki, sorry.
Yeah, Nikki, you want to say a couple words before we disconnect? Oh, sneeze. Bless you, Alana. Nikki, were you gonna? Oh, okay. You're good to go. Okay. Well, yeah, I cannot tell you, as a leader in academia, this message of listening, it's so important. And I think all of us, teachers, professors, researchers, like, we have so much to gain. So it's kind of amazing to find like-minded women who are as passionate about this. And I just hope that we can, keep working on this really, 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 really important work. So thank you. I'm feeling recharged and inspired, even though it's really, we've got one more event, but it's exciting. I just keep thinking about what more we're going to create here, and to have you a part of that, Alana. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your love.
Thank you for having me.
Truly. So I want to go ahead with a few words before we get out of here. I want to acknowledge our partners in this event, the Jorgensen Center for the Performing Arts and the H. Fred Simmons African American Cultural Center. Check out their upcoming spring events on Jorgensen Digital Stage at jorgensen.uconn.edu and the AACC at aac.uconn.edu. Grab a quick snack and come back to us at 7 o'clock for our final Amplifying Black Voices in Hollywood event. Our keynote at 7 o'clock, we're going to welcome writer-director Romany Malco to talk about his film, Tijuana Jackson, Purpose Over Prison. In the final event, Fighting for Equity in Hollywood, Leveraging Film as a Conduit for Change. And it's going to be a great follow-up to this conversation with Alana. So I encourage you to come. And for the rest of the spring semester, primarily on Fridays, we have a rich lineup of different speakers. The next event on Monday night at 7 o'clock, we're going to welcome Dr. Aaliyah Brown to present Black Rhizomes, a digital public history practice. And see our other upcoming events at dmd.uconn.edu/diverse. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media if you are enjoying this content, because we're going to have a lot more this semester. Last thanks to all of our wizards and organizers behind the scenes. Nicole Justice has been amazing. Stacy Webb, Michael Toomey, who's back there running all of the tech, Jorgensen staff, our student marketing team, our graduate assistant, Matthew Mullen, who created the artwork that we saw for this tonight, and everyone else who helped to produce this great event. And most of all, thanks to everybody out in the virtual audience. We've had about 70 viewers from around the country tonight for this event. So that's amazing. It's going to continue to be on YouTube, so you can check it out and share it with your friends. And I hope more than everything that all of you feel like as energized and inspired and excited about the future of the industry as I do from having this incredible conversation with the three of these amazing women. There's so much work to be done. But if we can continue to inspire and mentor our young creatives out there, we can hopefully make a difference and make this little steps that we need to change this industry. So thank you again. Stay safe, wear a mask, and have an incredible weekend. And we will see you soon. Bye-bye.